one of the reasons that the American commitment to Israel is so strong, that it's not only reflecting the impact of well-organized pro-Israeli lobbies, but it also represents the views of the Pentagon that sees Israel now as an indispensable strategic ally in the effort to control and exert influence throughout the region.
The main concern for the United States, like the world, is the oil-producing regions. And in order to control that, you need a way of doing it.
Desperate for a peace that would finally end occupation, Palestinians again came to the negotiating table in 2000.
People think, look, Israel was very forthcoming. It offered 95% of the West Bank, of the occupied territories, to the Palestinians, and they rejected it in violence. The assumption of that 95% argument is that getting 95% of the land gives you 95% sovereignty, a sovereign country. But I think it's very useful to think in terms of a prison. If you look at a blueprint of a prison, it looks like the prisoners own the place. And the prisoners have 95% of the area. They've got the living areas, they have the exercise yard, they have the cafeteria, they've got the work areas. All the prison authorities have is 5%, is the control.
The average Palestinian didn't think they were throwing anything away because there was nothing to throw away. They had tuned out what Barak and Arafat were talking about, because on the ground there were ongoing land expropriations, tree uprootings, road building, unfair water allocation, leaving many Palestinian families in the summer and fall with 2 hours of running water a week, when next door you have a settlement with a swimming pool and green lawns. So what do you expect people to think?
And it was that pressure, that sense of being squeezed, that finally exploded in September of 2000 in what became the Second Intifada.
What is called the Second Intifada is essentially a mobilization of resistance against this structure of occupation and oppression. Israel, from the very beginning of these demonstrations, had indeed relied on excessive force. They had used live ammunition against unarmed demonstrators, had inflicted several deaths, and hundreds of casualties in the opening days of the Intifada.
Sometimes the Israelis are speaking about rubber bullets they used. By the way, it's not rubber, it's steel coated with rubber. This bullet, it killed many of the kids who are demonstrating, sometimes while they are throwing stones. As this case, I'll show you what happened. He is a 14 years old from Khan Younis. He was shot with a one like this, and it entered here, and he died.
A lot of the deaths have been children, and we do have some documentary evidence that security forces are firing on crowds of children.
The soldiers weren't at risk. They're heavily armored, they have all this high-powered weaponry, and no child with a stone is going to be a risk to them.
Most of the Palestinian abuses involve shooting at settlements, ambushes on settler cars, and obviously the suicide bombings inside Israel.
There are some risks to Israeli life. Many Israelis have been killed.
When there was this horrible suicide bombing at the pizza place in Jerusalem, I went to visit some of the kids who survived that blast in the hospital. It was horrible. It was horrible to see what happened to these children.
You see the blood, you see the agony of the family. This is what the world sees. But one cannot take it out of the general context. And the context is of an Israeli occupation which is, it seems not to be so brutal, but it's very brutal. It really makes people's lives unbearable.
The use of suicide bombers is an act of desperation. It's the weapons of the weak.
Israel doesn't do it, never, because it has airplanes and helicopters. Why should they send anybody to make suicide?
I think we have to change our conception of what Israel is. Israel likes to present itself as this little country surrounded by a sea of hostile Arabs, and we just want peace, and they're violent. Israel is the 5th largest nuclear power in the world. It's got between 200 and 300 nuclear warheads. So the reality is that Israel's a regional superpower.
For the first time, the resistance to that occupation had, to a very small extent, an armed component. There was nothing close to equal force.
At every stage, they had used grossly excessive force against a completely defenseless civilian population.
The victims have been overwhelmingly Palestinian civilians, not armed groups or armed individuals.